And if you grew up in a black family, well, then you already know that we didn't talk about things. We brushed things under the rug. Some things just weren't a family conversation. Our parents didn't get healing from the things that they've been through, so they don't even know how to get us healing for the things that we're going through. Welcome to another episode of Becoming with Angelina Watkins, where we are turning dreamers into believers and doers, where we are having open, candid conversations about how we've overcome adversity, reached a level of success, and we're living life on our terms. And we are here to give you a fresh perspective and the blueprint to win at love, life, and money. I'm your host, Angelina Watkins, your queen of becoming, here to help you become who you're supposed to be so that you can do what you're purposed to do, so you can live the life that you're supposed to live. And so today's topic, we're going to get into how to handle trauma residue. Now, in the last episode titled Trauma Informed, I talked about what is trauma, what is the causes of, or the category of what you would consider to be trauma. And then I talked about what trauma looks like in your adulthood. And when you have trauma in your adulthood, we call that residue, right? It's the residue left over from some things that happened to you when you were younger, some things that happened to you growing up, some things that you've seen and heard, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe in the school system that you were in. But some things have been said, some things have happened, some things that were done, some things you saw, and it has caused you to act a certain way in your adulthood. And some of those ways we act are maybe a little unhealthy, right? And we do that as a result of not properly healing from the trauma that we've experienced, not properly getting the right knowledge and wisdom about the dysfunction that we've seen or that we may have grew up in, not really being able to broaden our horizons and being treated a certain way depending on where you lived and what school system that you were in, right? And we've all dealt with some things. We've all had some type of trauma. But, some have dealt with more trauma than others that has caused long-lasting effects, because things weren't talked about, things weren't dealt with, and there never was that healing. We just tucked it away, we just hid it, and we just ignored it and act like it wasn't there. And if you grew up in a black family, well, then you already know that we didn't talk about things. We brushed things under the rug. Some things just weren't a family conversation. Our parents didn't get healing from the things that they've been through, so they don't even know how to get us healing for the things that we're going through, right? And so now you have this residue. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to handle that residue. But before I get into talking about how you handle residue, how do we heal from the residue? How do we get rid of and break those behaviors that we have that are causing us issues, pain, and are counterproductive to the things that we want and the things that we want to do and where we want to go? Okay, we got to learn how to identify the pattern and break it. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between residue and a fresh wound, because you got to know you got to understand the distinction between those two in order for you to understand and look at the residue that you're dealing with. And so when we think about fresh wounds, that's something that has, it's new, it's fresh, it's happened, here recently. And when you have a fresh wound, you have an opportunity to, if you address it correctly, it can heal and you won't have any scars or any residue, right? So let's look at that in the sense in real life, like when you have a physical wound. Let's say you have a cut on your hand, and when you have that cut, when you were little, mama would clean it in some soap and water. She might put some peroxide or some alcohol on there, right? You might get some Neosporin or some A&D ointment, and we're going to put a Band-Aid on it. And we're going to keep cleaning it, and we're going to keep, attending to that cut, because we don't want it to get infected. We don't want it to get worse than what it already is. And we also want it to heal to the point where your skin, you can't even tell you were ever cut, that you were ever wounded, right? And in the sense of emotional and mental wounds, right? Sometimes things happen to us that if we address those things when they happen, and if we deal with the problem at hand, we have a higher increase of being able to heal properly and not have any scars and residue because we dealt with it. But we get residue when we don't deal with an emotional and mental wound. It's when we don't address it, we hide it and we avoid it and we don't talk about it. And then that wound, that emotional wound, it becomes infected. And what does that look like? The infection looks like you now displaying unhealthy emotional behaviors that are stemming from you not releasing and you not getting over something. And so now we have this coping mechanism that we've created in order to be able to deal with what has happened to us. And that's when you see people who act in aggression, right? Aggression is a symptom and it's a residue of someone who's not dealt with their feelings and not dealt with what's happened to them. And it's all bottled up inside. And now they're just everything, they're just aggressive with everything. We gotta learn how to release, not hold on to those things when we have a wound, but address those wounds, tend to those wounds, okay? And so there's a difference between having a fresh wound and a residue. When you have residue, that means something has already happened. Time that went on, you probably think you're over it and you're really not, right? Time has lapsed and you may have sometimes forgot about what happened to you until it's maybe brought up or until you're triggered, right? But we can tell when someone has residue by your behaviors, and we call that bleeding out. You're bleeding out. We see people bleeding out on social media with your posts. We see people bleeding out with the videos that they post. We see people bleeding out when they are quick to get so angry and go off and cut somebody out. You know, the residue is seen when you're just bleeding out with your display of behaviors and how you are acting. And so I just want to quickly go over with you, how do you deal with residue, right? How do you deal with that? How do you even know that you have residue, right? How do you even identify what it is that the behaviors that you're displaying that are stemming from something that happened to you in the past and that's causing you issues today in your adulthood? How would you even know? Because at some point, our behaviors become our norm. And that's why you hear people say, well, that's just the way she is. She's always been that way. And we just ignore the behavior and we enable the behavior and we don't address it. But sometimes you have behaviors and people do address it with you, but you don't want to listen. Okay? They're telling you that you act a certain way and you need not be that way. And you want to say, well, that's just the way I am. No, sweetie, it's not just the way you are. You are that way because something has happened to you and you have adopted this emotionally unhealthy behavior as a coping mechanism in order to deal with what has happened to you, but without addressing it, okay? And so you have to be able to identify the behavior so that you can break the behavior. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of behavior that you have and you have to identify it. Now, some of you probably know what you do and that it ain't right and that you need to change it. But there's a lot of you, again, it's become your norm. It's dysfunctional to everyone else, but it's become your norm and it's just nothing to you to even recognize that this is not a healthy way to be. This is not a healthy way to act, okay? But once you've identified that pattern of behavior that you need to break, what do? How does that work? How do I get rid of the behavior? What am I going to do? In order to get rid of a behavior, you have to replace it with another behavior. So if you want to get rid of a bad behavior, you've got to replace it with a good behavior, okay? And so you got to identify the bad behavior and then replace it with doing something different, right? If I get angry and I like to throw stuff and break things, well, then that's a bad behavior when I get angry. That's not a good way to display my anger. So to replace that with a bad behavior would be to tell myself, okay, I'm gonna get angry, but I'm going to not throw stuff. I'm gonna not break things. And so now I'm going to keep telling myself when I get angry, because I gotta first work on this behavior. Don't throw nothing, just don't throw nothing, just don't do it. Have you ever done that self-talk? I know I can't be the only one. Have you ever done that self-talk where you try to talk yourself out of doing something that you know you have no business doing? You know, that's what you got to do sometimes when you have these behaviors that are counterproductive to who you are, who God created you to be, and where you're going. You have to talk yourself out of it. So now you know you're mad. You know when you get mad, you normally go off and cut somebody out. Now you got to keep telling yourself, don't say nothing, don't say nothing, don't go off, don't go off. You'll be amazed at how, if you keep practicing that, eventually you will begin to listen to yourself, right? And you'll begin to be able to self regulate your emotions and your behaviors in those moments that you're ready to go off. You'll start to learn how to control yourself. So that's, one of the things that you have to do, again, is just you got to replace the behavior with a good behavior and then gradually work into that. So if you're always getting angry and throwing stuff, well, first let's work on not throwing stuff. Can we just not throw things? Like, because anger is a real behavior, it's natural, but can we just not throw things? Once we've learned to stop throwing things, once we've learned to stop cussing people out, then maybe the next thing that you work on is how often you're getting angry. What are you getting angry about? Start taking inventory of what's upsetting you, what's triggering you, so that you can start seeing the different things that upset you, and then ask yourself, why am I getting so upset over this thing? And then being able to take the time to realize why you shouldn't get so upset. Maybe this thing you're valid in getting upset, but these little things over here, yeah, they don't warrant the reaction that you're giving. And once you start realizing that, you know what, I just be kind of going a little overboard, let me kind of start getting control of that. Once you start recognizing those things, then you can then begin working on that behavior. And so anger was just an example. I just use that as an example because it's the easiest example to use. But it's going to be like that for any behaviors that you display that are not good. You're going to have to replace it with a more appropriate behavior. The other thing when handling residue and recognizing the emotionally unhealthy behaviors that you display is to start working on your emotional intelligence. Start working on being in touch with your feelings and how you feel, why you feel that way, being able to self-reflect on the emotion that you're feeling, where it's coming from, where it's stemming from, your body reactions. You got to now develop emotional intelligence about your feelings and who you are, because that's the only way you're going to be able to control your emotions, right? And tell yourself how you're going to feel and tell yourself how you're going to react. You got to learn emotional intelligence is all about how you use and manage your emotions. And once you learn to do that, you'll begin to build empathy for others, because you'll be able to see where they are, because you've seen where you are. Now you can see where other people are, right? You'll be able to control your stress levels, because your stress levels is all about based on your emotions of it all, right? And then what those emotions is doing to your body, and it's causing the stress on the body. So you're going to want to build emotional intelligence. And then the next thing after that, well, what I'm giving you is not in sequential order, okay? Some of these things are kind of all happening at once, but I have to, present them to you in an order. But after, thinking about emotion and building your emotional intelligence, you got to think about your mindset. How do you change how you think in your perspective? Because a lot of your reactions and a lot of the things that you do and the way you act come from how you're thinking. It's how you feel, but it's also what you're thinking. And sometimes it's a perspective of what you saw and what you thought something was, and then your feelings come into play of how I'm telling you that what you saw was right, and now we're all upset. And we're frustrated and we're disappointed and we're angry and we're showing aggression and we are doing things that aren't good. Other unhealthy behaviors include, oh my God, they didn't speak to me. And that whole, I want approval seeking, or being a people pleaser and wanting validation, those things begin to stir up. Because we want to be included, we want to be seen, we don't want to be overlooked, we don't want to be left out, because at some point in our past we were rejected. And so now that rejection is showing up in your future as someone who just needs to be included and always involved or in the clique, right? And when we're not in the clique, we're upset. because we think we've been forgotten. We think we've been overlooked. Okay, so you got to build and start changing your mindset so that you can see other perspectives, because what you see and what you think is not always what it is. Now, I talked about that last week. When it comes to behaviors, the behaviors you see is not always what it is, but what you see when things are happening is not always the case either. Sometimes you have to go and get the other person's perspective of what's going on, what they're doing, why they're doing it, in order to understand what's happening before you get all upset. I can use the example of me, in my household and blending a family. I just have my own way of doing things, and I'm very strategic and methodical in a lot of the things that I do. And so my family wasn't always understanding, well, why does it have to be this way? Why does it have to be that way? And they're getting upset with me thinking that I'm being controlling, when I really wasn't necessarily trying to be controlling. I was just trying to bring order to a newly blended household. I done went from 2 people in a household to 5 people in a household, and it's chaotic. And so in my mind, I'm trying to organize things and structure things to make it easy, not only on me but everyone else. But to them, they thought it was too much. Why should you do it this way? Why do we have to do it that way? Until things wasn't working out their way. And then they began to see, oh, that's why she said what she said. Oh, that's why she said do it like this. Yeah, I was trying to make it easy on you. I was trying to make it so that you wouldn't have to do things more than once. But when, sometimes you just got to let a person fall. Sometimes you just got to let people make their own mistakes. Even though you're trying to keep them from making their own mistakes, sometimes you just got to be like, I'm gonna let you make your own mistakes. And so you let them do it their way. And then when their way doesn't work and they got to do it all over again, now they're coming to you saying, well, what should I do? Okay, this is what you needed to do or should have done. And it's only because I'm trying to help you, trying to save you time, trying to save you money. Okay? And they wasn't having it. So we got to be able to see other perspectives and not think that our way is the only way and our way is always right. Now, the last thing that I'll tell you about dealing with residue is what worked for me. You got to get the emotional, well, first you got to identify the residue, but you got to gain that emotional intelligence. You got to change your mindset. But the third thing, which is the most important thing, is building a relationship with God. I'm going to tell you right now, my healing came about and became a more long-lasting healing that I could maintain because I was building a relationship with God. Now, I was born and raised in the church, but my relationship with God wasn't based upon what I knew. It was based upon what I was told. And my belief in God was really based upon everything else people were telling me and what I was seeing when I'm going to church and some of what I'm learning. But how do I build a relationship with God? How do I get closer to know who he really is? And when I began to build my own relationship with God and get to really know, is there really a God? Right. Is there really a God? Oh, there really is a God, because now I'm seeing some things, I'm hearing some things, I'm feeling some things, I'm knowing some things as I'm building my relationship with God that has made it real for me. But the biggest thing was reading the Bible. Reading the Bible, studying the word, and applying it to my life. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with reading the Bible. They think it's boring. They don't understand it. They want to go get all these versions and read those versions. And there's nothing wrong with that. I read them all. I read the King James Version first to see what maybe God will reveal to me if he'll open up the parables for me. And then there's sometimes I question what may be what is intended by the verbiage. And so then I will go look at the Amplified Version or the NIV or the Message Bible to kind of see what it's saying. And then I have a website that I study from as well. But I study and I think about, what is God trying to tell me? What is he trying to get to me in this moment? And how do I apply that to my life, right? And that's how I began to build a relationship with God, and then standing on the promises of God and the things that I know that God said he would do for me, and standing on what I know he said was my purpose is what keeps me going. Okay. And then as you do those things, as you continue to build your relationship with God, as you continue to change your mind, as you continue to build emotional intelligence, the residue will begin to go away, because there's no way you can build emotional intelligence, change your mindset, and build a relationship with God, and your behaviors not change. The only way that your behaviors are not going to change is if you're really not changing your mindset and changing your emotions and believing in who God is and what He can do for you. Okay? Those three things have to be there. If those things are not there and they're not working together, you're going to struggle to overcome and break the cycle of the residue. Okay? Now, those are the three main factors. Now, there's actually some steps in breaking cycles, but those three things are needed. Far before you ever get to a process, you have to be willing to build emotional intelligence, change your mindset, and build a relationship with God as you are going through the process, because it's a process. You can't just wake up today and say, you know what, I don't want to do this no more. There's not too many people, and I can't say it won't happen, but there's not too many people who could just wake up and be like, I'm not going to do this anymore and quit. Just like it's not too many people who are on drugs or alcohol and they just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm not doing drugs anymore. Has it happened? It's happened, but it's very, very rare. Most people have to go through a process. You got to go through a process of transition to be able to break those cycles. And one of those, and the three things that you need as you're going through that transition to break those cycles: emotional intelligence, a changed mindset, and a relationship with God. All right. Now, that is my talk for the day. As always, where you are is not where you're supposed to be. No, that's not what I say. Where you are is not where you have to be. Your past does not define you. You define you. So heal, transform, and pursue you.